Okay, today we're going to talk about the No Child Left Behind Act. This is our last piece of legislation we'll be covering for this semester, and it's a piece of legislation that many of us are familiar with already. Many of us in the classroom, obviously, if you are in the classroom presently, your practice has been changed or dictated by the No Child Left Behind Act. And so, as we know, the No Child Left Behind Act was signed into legislation by President Bush, and obviously it is the major education law of the land. It was reauthorized as the No Child Left Behind Act, but it started out as the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. So there were changes to that law, and certainly one thing was the name change. And at the time, and continuing into the present day, the No Child Left Behind Act really tries to address these four basic educational reform principles so that there's strong accountability, more flexible local control, options for parents, and the emphasis on scientifically based or research-based teaching methods. So what does greater accountability mean? Well, it means that states are held responsible for state standards, and we're just now putting into place national standards, which, as we speak, at this time, on this date, about 85 to 90% of the states have adopted the national standards. And that states must track how students are doing via standardized tests, and that these reports in terms of how students are doing in each district must be made available to the public, and that also that there has to be proficiency levels for all students. In terms of more flexible local control, the No Child Left Behind Act gives states and local districts more control and flexibility with money. So how do you spend the money that will best benefit students is left up to the local education agency to decide. And it's supposed to reduce any bureaucratic access issues to federal money. In terms of more options for parents, we really haven't seen this play out in practice, but essentially what the law says is that if the child is going to a failing school, then parents can transfer their child to a better school. If a school is failing, parents can use federal funds for supplemental educational services. And again, we haven't seen this particular Reform Act really in practice at this time. We have seen an emphasis on proving teaching methods, scientifically based, research-based instruction, and there has been funds directed towards implementing scientifically based instruction methodology. And there has been funds made available to promote teachers in terms of quality and recruitment. So how does NCLB and IDEA combine? And certainly we do know that in terms of testing, all means all. So with the implementation of NCLB, we have IDEA making sure that all students are tested using either the state standardized test or a modified version or a completely different version of a test, the alternative test. So again, this slide talks more about the state testing in relation to children with disabilities. In terms of graduation for children with disabilities, we are looking at the great bulk of children that are identified and receive an IEP to be receiving a regular diploma. But there has been, over the last couple of years, a lot of discussion about those students who attend school to age 21 as mandated by the special education law, and that there has been discussion in terms of alternative diplomas, and again, that is at the local education agency in terms of decision. In terms of that testing then and proficiency levels, etc., the law does stipulate that if you are going to pull out children with disabilities as a separate group, so in other words, if their scores and their graduation rates are not counted into the regular education population, the law does stipulate certain percentages as to how many of those students in any district are allowed to be involved in alternative tests, modified tests, etc. So the reason for this is that we have to be carefully attending to all children. We have to make sure that children are not over-identified, and these percentages parallel the percentage of children who are in the various categories of disability. So, for example, we have a very low percentage of children involved in the alternative assessments. So here we see the option presented not just to typical children but to children with disabilities, meaning that the parent can choose to have the child to transfer to another school if that particular school is identified as failing. And a great reason for the No Child Left Behind Act was to really look at those students who have not come to school with the benefits to succeed in school. So, but the implication then is that it's unclear, there's unclear implication due to lack of information and background. Will the new school be required to provide identical program options to these schools, to these children? That remains a question. The law does build in that supplemental services would be provided to any school that is in need of improvement, corrective action, or restructuring. However, that funding has been inconsistent. So in other words, that what has happened in reverse we've seen is that those schools that have not met their targets have been punished versus received what they believe to be the needed services to correct the reason behind perhaps so many students in their schools failing and not meeting AYP, or annual yearly progress. One impact that has affected all present teachers in the classroom, but as well as future teachers, is the mandate that all teachers need to be what's considered highly qualified teachers. And that, saying that simply, is that they need to show competency in the content knowledge that they teach. So an implication for special education is that this is a major task to meet the goal due to current special education teacher shortages, And it has really involved a great restructuring of teacher education to certify special ed teachers, and has involved a lot more training for special ed teachers versus their general education counterparts. The focus on scientifically based research methodology is important, and there has been a lot written. So we do have those resources out there on the web in the research to determine what are those curricula that are considered research based, and what we're looking at is peer reviewed effective instruction. And so we can't just choose anymore what we're going to teach, how we're going to teach in the classroom, what we're going to use to teach. But we can't use fads, so to say, as the second bullet states. But we have to look to proven curricula to use in our instruction. Okay, so this slide just addresses more of the highly qualified. I'm not so sure we've reduced class sizes. As a matter of fact, I think we've increased the amount of students that special education teachers are required to support, and so the caseloads can be extremely high. There is a caseload mandate in the federal special education law, but we do see all kinds of arrangements in terms of special ed teachers who are considered case managers for 50 plus students when we look at this in practice. We are looking to support, with this law, preparing students to be ready for school, and again, particularly those students who are at risk. There are still a lot of things going on in the field that are unclear in terms of actually how to implement this law. Certainly we have the testing down pat, but when we talk about things such as highly qualified, transferring from school to school, in practice, these are things that are still unclear, and in some instances not being done, are not we're not being held accountable to do them, and how they're done by each LEA is different. And so we do know that the No Child Left Behind Act will be reauthorized again, and we will wait to see what future changes are brought into the educational system.